I don't know when it started, the distance between Elena and me, but I can remember the first time it felt wrong. We'd been married for almost 7 years, and before that, we had been inseparable. People used to joke about how we'd finish each other's sentences, how she could always make me laugh even on my worst days. But that all started to slip away slowly, in little ways. At first, I brushed it off. It's easy to blame work or stress or just the grind of life. I'd come home late some nights too, trying to hold things together, pay the bills, fix things around the house. Elena had her own job, but she was different. She started staying late at work, and at first, I didn't think much of it. She was always the more driven one between us. But then the excuses piled up. A late meeting here, a friend in town she had to catch up with there. And the more I asked her about it, the less she told me. Everything's fine, Nico, she'd say, brushing me off with that smile of hers, the kind she used to wear when she wanted to charm me, when she actually cared about what I was feeling. But I felt it, you know? Something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was this coldness in the way she looked at me sometimes, like I was more of a fixture in the house than a husband. And I guess, part of me knew I was being naive, telling myself it would blow over, that this was just a phase. But that nagging feeling wouldn't let up. I didn't have a solid reason to confront her yet. No proof. Just a sinking gut feeling. But then came the night I found that note. It was a random evening, nothing special. I'd been going through some old papers in the attic, cleaning out some boxes, trying to make space. My hands were dusty, and the pages stuck together. And then, as I shuffled through an old photo album, something caught my eye. It was a folded piece of paper, wedged between 2 family photos. I almost didn't open it. I thought it was just a forgotten scrap from a long time ago. But when I saw the handwriting, I froze. I recognized it instantly. Elena's. I didn't even need to read the whole thing. Just the first few words were enough to knock the wind out of me. I'll meet you at 8, same place as last time. I couldn't breathe. I had to sit down. I read it over and over, as if maybe it would change. But it didn't. I think I must have sat there for hours, staring at that damn note, letting the words burn into my mind. My head was spinning, and my heart was pounding so loud in my chest I could barely hear anything else. She's been sleeping with Misha, my younger brother. It was like my whole world collapsed in that moment. All those years of trusting her, of loving her, all of it felt like a lie. And my brother? The guy I grew up with? The one I used to share everything with? I felt like I was drowning in betrayal. It wasn't just her anymore. It was him too. The 2 people who were supposed to be the closest to me, the ones I thought would never turn on me, both of them right under my nose. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to break something. But I didn't. I just sat there. And I let it settle in. I didn't confront Elena that night. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to figure out how to handle it, or maybe I just wasn't ready to face the full reality of it. But I knew one thing for sure. Things were never going to be the same. And so, I made a decision. I was going to get my revenge, but not in the way people expect. I wasn't going to shout or make a scene. That wasn't my style. Instead, I was going to make them pay. Quietly. I didn't tell anyone. Not Misha. Not Elena. Hell, I didn't even tell myself what I was planning. But I knew this. I was going to make them feel the weight of what they'd done. And I was going to do it in a way they'd never see coming. The thing about betrayal is it doesn't hit you all at once. At least, not at first. You get these flashes of understanding, like tiny cracks forming in a wall. And each crack makes you realize, slowly, just how fragile everything really was. But it's not until the wall completely crumbles that you can see everything for what it is. After finding that note, I didn't confront Elena. I didn't throw the accusations in her face, because I knew I wasn't ready. I knew that if I came at her too hard, I'd risk losing everything, not just the marriage but any chance of understanding what was really going on. I had to be smart about this. So I did what I do best. I observed. It was subtle at first, watching her come home later, hearing the excuses she'd give about work, or how she had to meet some friend last minute. I'd sit in the living room, flipping through channels, pretending I wasn't noticing the empty space between us. The silence was louder than any words. But I also started watching Misha. And that's when the puzzle pieces started to fit together. Misha was my younger brother. Not much younger, only 2 years, but we'd always been close, like best friends. Growing up, we shared everything. Our friends, our problems, even the dumb fights we had over the TV remote. He was like a mirror to me, in a way. So when I started noticing him slipping around the house at odd hours, I didn't think much of it. But then, there were things that started to stand out. The way he'd suddenly show up at our place unannounced, or how he'd text Elena when I wasn't looking. It was like he was always in the background, hovering just enough to keep up the act that everything was normal. But I saw it. I could feel it. Something about the way he smiled at her now was different. It wasn't the smile of a brother-in-law, but of a man who knew things I didn't. And then came the night he casually dropped by for dinner, uninvited. He was acting like everything was fine, like he didn't have a care in the world. But I couldn't help but notice the way Elena flinched when I mentioned something about our plans for the weekend. I saw her glance at Misha, then quickly look away, like she was trying to cover up a lie. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I kept it in check. I didn't say anything. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do over the years. I stayed calm. I'd learned to read people, to catch their little habits, their nervous tics, the way they held themselves when they were hiding something. And Elena? She was getting sloppy. Her excuses became more frequent, more ridiculous, as if she thought I wouldn't notice. And Misha? He was becoming too comfortable, too familiar with her in ways that felt off. But I didn't say anything to either of them. I didn't let on that I knew. That was the last thing they expected. They probably thought I was just some oblivious husband, too caught up in work or life to see what was happening under my own roof. But I wasn't. I wasn't blind. I just wasn't ready to act yet. I needed time to plan. I started following them, making sure I knew their routines. When Elena said she had a late meeting, I knew better than to just take her word for it. I'd follow her. Subtle at first, just enough to make sure she was where she said she'd be. I saw the way she'd slip into Misha's apartment building like she was sneaking around. And every time I saw that, a little more of me died inside. But I didn't confront her then. No. I wasn't going to make the mistake of giving her a chance to talk her way out of it. I wasn't going to give her any space to lie her way back into my trust. I waited. And I watched. They didn't know it, but they were both walking on thin ice. I was waiting for the right moment, the moment when they thought they were safe, when they thought I was too busy or too dumb to figure it out. And that moment came one rainy evening. The rain that night felt different. It wasn't the kind of downpour that's cleansing or peaceful. No, it was heavy, the kind that makes the streets glisten like wet glass, making everything look blurry and distant. It matched the way I felt, like I was walking through a fog, unable to see clearly but knowing exactly where I was headed. Elena had told me she was working late again, another one of those vague, last-minute meetings. Her job was important, she always said that, and I used to believe her. But after everything that had happened, it just sounded like one more lie. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. I already knew where she was. I'd followed her a few nights before, just far enough to stay out of sight. I watched her walk into Misha's apartment building. I knew exactly where she was headed. And that night, something in me snapped. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend everything was fine while they both carried on with their lies. I'd waited long enough. It was time to make them pay. It wasn't hard to get into Misha's building. We used to live in the same neighborhood, and I knew the place like the back of my hand. The fire escape was old, creaky even, but it still held steady under my weight. I didn't make a sound. Moving like a shadow, I climbed the stairs, staying as quiet as I could. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I kept it in check. There was no room for emotion now. Just action. I wasn't angry. Not at first, anyway. I was just numb. It was almost as if the shock of it all had drained the color from everything around me. The only thing that mattered was making them both understand the depth of what they'd done. They had to feel the weight of their betrayal. I reached Misha's floor, and there it was, the door to his apartment. I could hear voices inside. Elena's laugh, that laugh I used to love, that used to make me feel like everything was okay. Now it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I stood there for a second, just listening. They didn't know I was outside, didn't know I was waiting. I had to let them think they were safe for a little longer. I needed that moment of false security. I needed them to believe they'd gotten away with it. And then, when I was sure they were comfortable, I slipped through the fire escape door, silently moving into the hallway. The sound of my footsteps was muffled by the thick carpet, but my heart was loud. Too loud. I stood at the door, listening to them talk. Their words were muffled, but I could hear the familiar hum of the conversation. Elena's voice. Misha's low laugh. It was like a sickening echo of everything I thought I had with them. I didn't knock. I didn't announce myself. I wasn't here to make a dramatic entrance. I was here to make sure they knew. I was here to break them. I turned the doorknob slowly. The door creaked open, just enough for me to slip in unnoticed. They didn't see me at first. Elena was sitting on the couch, her back to the door. Misha was standing by the window, his hands in his pockets, looking out at the rain. The silence in the room hung heavy for a moment, and then Elena spoke. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice a little too sweet, too casual. "Yeah," Misha answered, his tone relaxed. "Just thinking. Nico's been acting weird lately." I almost laughed. The nerve of him. Of both of them. They were so comfortable, so sure that they were getting away with everything. I stepped further into the room, just enough to be seen. The look on their faces when they realized I was there. That's something I'll never forget. Elena's face went white as a sheet. She stood up so fast I thought she might fall. Misha froze, his eyes wide with panic, like a deer caught in headlights. For a second, nobody moved. Time felt like it stopped. And then I spoke. "How long?" I asked. My voice was cold, harder than I even meant it to be. Elena's mouth opened like she was going to say something, anything, but nothing came out. She just stared at me, her eyes wide and scared. And Misha? He looked like he wanted to run. He took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. "How long, Elena? How long have you been doing this?" It wasn't even the question anymore. It wasn't about hearing the truth. I'd already gotten the answer. I could see it in their eyes, in the way they stood there, guilty as hell. I didn't need the words. She didn't answer. Misha didn't either. I felt my hands shake, but I kept them steady. I reached into my jacket and pulled out something small, something simple. I didn't need anything flashy, nothing big or dramatic, just something sharp, something that would send a message. Elena gasped when she saw the knife. But it wasn't about the blade. It was about what it represented. I walked right up to Misha and grabbed him by the throat, slamming him into the wall. His breath caught, and I could feel the pulse of fear in his skin. "You knew, didn't you?" I said, my voice low, controlled. "You knew exactly what you were doing." Elena screamed, but I didn't look at her. She was just a bystander now. She was nothing. Misha, for all his cocky bravado, couldn't say a word. His throat was clenched in my grip, his body pressed against the wall. Without a word, I took the knife and cut across his palm, just deep enough for it to draw blood. A thin line of red dripped down his hand, and he winced. The look on his face was pure panic. He had no idea what to say. He had no way to explain his way out of this. I stood back and looked at him, at both of them. Elena was shaking, her face pale, her eyes full of terror. But there was nothing left for me to say. They both knew what they'd done. They both knew what the price was. I turned to leave, not a word spoken. There was no need for final words, no need to say anything more. I walked out of that apartment and didn't look back. The door clicked behind me like a closing chapter, and for a brief moment, I stood there, listening to the silence on the other side. The air in the hallway felt heavy, thick with tension, and I could hear their muffled voices inside, but I didn't care anymore. I'd made my move. The message was sent. And that was enough. I walked down the fire escape without rushing. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking my jacket through. But it didn't matter. It wasn't about the weather anymore, or the cold, or even the weight of what had just happened. It was about the fact that I'd done it. I had gotten my revenge, in my own way. I wasn't the kind of guy who let emotions dictate his actions. I never was. But when betrayal hits you in the gut like that, it changes you. You don't get to go back to the way things were before. I got to the bottom of the building and looked up at Misha's apartment. It was dark now, except for the dim light coming through the curtains. I could almost hear their whispers, their questions about what had just happened, but I didn't care to listen anymore. They'd never be the same after tonight. Elena and Misha. No matter how hard they tried to move past it, there would always be that mark. That scar. I didn't want to hear them beg for forgiveness, or try to explain it away. There was no excuse for what they'd done. What bothered me the most, though, it wasn't the fact that Elena had slept with my brother. It wasn't even the way she'd lied to me over and over, like it meant nothing. It was the fact that I had trusted them both. That I had let them in so completely that I couldn't see what was happening right in front of me. That hurt more than anything. But even as I stood there in the rain, I realized something. There was a freedom in knowing that I had made them face the truth. Maybe it wasn't the cleanest revenge. Maybe it wasn't the most dramatic or flashy. But it was real. It was earned. The walk home felt like a blur. My mind kept replaying the look on Misha's face when I marked him. That brief moment of terror when he realized he couldn't just talk his way out of it. It was the most satisfying thing I'd felt in months. But at the same time, I wasn't relieved. I didn't feel better. Because revenge, no matter how much you plan or justify it, never really fills that empty space inside you. When I got home, I didn't even bother to look at the clock. I knew Elena wouldn't be back anytime soon. And even if she did, I wasn't interested in hearing any more of her lies. The silence in the house was suffocating. It felt too big, too empty, like I was standing in the middle of a vast, abandoned place that used to feel like home. I sank down on the couch and tried to think about something else. Anything else. But I couldn't. My brain kept flashing back to the night. Her, him, the knife, the blood. All of it. I don't know how long I sat there, just staring at the wall. Maybe hours. Maybe minutes. The whole thing felt like a dream. Or a nightmare. Around midnight, I heard the front door creak open. I didn't get up. I didn't even look. I already knew it was her. She stood there for a second. I could hear her taking slow, careful steps inside. And then I heard her voice, soft and broken, like she wasn't sure whether she should speak at all. "Nico," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, we need to talk." I didn't say anything. I didn't even turn to look at her. I wasn't ready for the pleading, the excuses. She stood there for a while, and I could feel the weight of her presence in the room. I could feel her looking at me, probably wondering if I was going to yell or hit her or break something. But I didn't move. I didn't react. Finally, after what felt like forever, she spoke again, this time quieter, almost as if she was talking to herself more than to me. "I don't know what happened, Nico. I don't know how it got this far." I shook my head, but I didn't answer. She took another step forward, her voice softer, filled with regret. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I finally looked up at her. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the person standing in front of me wasn't the same woman I'd married. There was no fire in her eyes, no spark, no confidence. Just this pitiful, broken woman who had nothing left to say. "I gave you everything," I said quietly. "And you gave me this." There was nothing more to say after that. Nothing that would fix it. I stood up and walked toward the door. She reached out to grab my arm, but I shook her off. "Don't," I told her. "Don't touch me." She didn't try again. She just stood there, crying silently, as I walked out of the house and into the rain. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't be in that house anymore. I couldn't be around her. I walked for hours, through the streets, through the rain, until everything blurred together. When I finally stopped, I found myself standing in front of a small bar. It wasn't anything fancy. Just a hole-in-the-wall place where nobody would ask questions. I walked in, ordered a drink, and sat at the bar, trying to forget the whole world for a while. The bartender didn't ask me anything. She just poured my drink and left me to myself. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel anything. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just numb. I didn't know what the future held. But in that moment, I realized something. I had to let go of all of it. Of Elena, of Misha, of the life I thought I had. It was gone. And I couldn't change that. The quiet collapse of everything I thought I knew was complete. And I was finally free. The next few days were a blur. I didn't go back home for a while. I couldn't. There was no real point in it, not yet. Not until I figured out what to do with the wreckage. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. About them. About how everything had crumbled. I stayed in the city, hopping between dive bars and cheap motels, just trying to put some space between me and what felt like the slow death of my life. My brother and wife, they weren't the only ones who'd betrayed me. I betrayed myself, too, for believing in them so completely. But what was I supposed to do? I had always believed in loyalty, in family, in the kind of love that was supposed to last forever. I thought that would be enough. But I'd been wrong. I didn't talk to anyone during those first few days. I didn't want to. Not my friends. Not even my old co-workers. Everyone who had ever been a part of my life seemed irrelevant. I felt like I was floating in this strange space, detached from the world, unsure of who I was anymore. I didn't even recognize myself. I tried to get some sleep, but the nights felt longer than they should have. It was the quiet that got to me, the endless echo of my thoughts in the dark. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elena's face. I saw Misha's hand bleeding on the floor, the fear in his eyes. I'd made my move, but the weight of it hung over me, like a cloud that wouldn't break. On the third night, I decided to go back home. There was nothing left for me out here on the streets. The silence in the apartment would be better than the noise in my head. I needed to face it. Face her. When I walked through the door, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't just the usual scent of our house. Something faintly floral mixed with the scent of the old leather couch. No, it was different. The house felt empty, cold. It wasn't just the space between us that had been hollowed out. It was the place itself. Elena wasn't there when I walked in, but I didn't expect her to be. She had probably spent the last couple of days in tears, trying to figure out how to make things right, or at least make me believe she was sorry. I didn't care. I didn't want her apology. I took a seat in the living room and just stared at the walls for a while. Every inch of this place had memories attached to it. The worn armchair where we'd spent late nights watching movies. The kitchen table where we'd argued about everything from finances to what to have for dinner. Even the damn photos on the walls. They all looked different now. Everything had changed. She came back around sunset, standing in the doorway, looking like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, her hair a mess. She had that lost, fragile look on her face, like she was expecting me to break down or shout at her, but I didn't. I couldn't. She stood there for a long time, and I could feel her hesitation, like she didn't know how to face me. After everything, I don't think she knew what to say either. "Where have you been?" she asked quietly, like she wasn't sure if I would even answer. "Out," I said, my voice flat. "Doesn't really matter." She took a step forward, her hands trembling slightly. "Nico, please. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to fix this." "Don't," I cut her off, my voice colder than I intended. "Don't try to fix this. You can't. Not anymore." The words hit her hard. I could see it in the way her shoulders slumped, in the way her lips parted like she wanted to speak but didn't know how. I didn't want to hear it. Not this time. Not after everything. She took a few more steps closer, still trying to reach me, like she thought if she just said the right thing, maybe I'd forget. Maybe I'd forgive her. But I wasn't the man she had married anymore. "I know I've hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "I never meant for it to go this far. I don't know why I did it, Nico. I just felt so alone, and Misha. He was there. I don't know when things changed. But I swear, it wasn't supposed to be this way." I let her talk, but I didn't listen. I couldn't. The more she said, the more I realized there was no way back. Her excuses, her tears, her regret, it wasn't enough. Nothing she could say would undo the last few months. Nothing could erase what she'd done, not to me, and not to our marriage. I stood up and walked past her, heading for the door. She stepped in front of me, blocking my way. Her hand reached out to touch my arm, but I shrugged it off. "Don't touch me," I told her, my voice sharp. She looked at me, her face wet with tears, and for the first time since all this started, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't guilt or regret. It was fear. She was scared, not for me, but for herself. "I never wanted to hurt you, Nico," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," I replied, my tone softening for just a second. "But you did." I didn't have anything else to say. I didn't owe her that. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. The apartment felt smaller the longer I stayed there, like it was closing in on me. I needed space. I needed distance. She didn't try to stop me again. She didn't say anything as I walked out and slammed the door behind me. I drove around for a while after that, just to clear my head. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't just go back to the house. Not yet. Not until I knew what I was supposed to do with the broken pieces of my life. But as I drove through the empty streets, I realized something. I couldn't keep running. Eventually, I'd have to face what was left, what had been destroyed. I just didn't know if I could fix it, or if I even wanted to. The days after that night dragged on. I spent most of my time alone, the weight of it all pressing down on me with every passing hour. There was no peace, no relief. I kept replaying everything in my head, Elena's face, Misha's guilt, the way she tried to justify everything like it could somehow make it better. But nothing could fix it. Nothing could bring back what had been shattered. I didn't go back home for a while. It felt like a prison now, and I couldn't stand the thought of stepping inside. So I rented a small apartment in the city. Nothing fancy, just a place to crash. I kept to myself, not wanting to deal with anyone, not even friends who might try to talk some sense into me. They didn't get it. No one did. Elena called me a few times. The first couple of days, I let it ring. I wasn't ready to listen to her, to hear her pleading voice or her broken excuses. I knew exactly what she'd say, that she was sorry, that she made a mistake, that it was all a huge misunderstanding. But I wasn't interested in hearing it. Not anymore. She had destroyed us both. On the third day, I picked up the phone. Not because I wanted to talk to her, but because I needed to know if she was really willing to fight for this. Or if it was all just for show. "Hello." Her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying for hours. "I'm listening," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. No anger. No emotion. I had to stay calm. "I don't know what to say, Nico," she started, her voice cracking. "I've been thinking about what you said. About how I can't fix it. And I know that. I know I can't fix it. But I can't just let this go. I can't let you go." I let her talk. She begged. She apologized. She promised it would never happen again, that she would do anything to make it right. But it was hollow. I could hear it in her voice, her desperation, the way she was clutching at straws. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for me to forget. "I don't think you can fix this," I said, my voice finally cracking. "Not after what you did. Not after everything that's happened. You've already broken something that can't be fixed. You crossed a line that." I stopped myself. There was no point in saying it out loud. She knew. I knew. "I just need time," she said, her voice almost pleading. "Please, Nico. Please don't leave me. Don't leave us." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Because, for a moment, I wondered if she really meant it. If she was actually willing to fight for what we had, or if she was just terrified of losing everything. But then I remembered Misha. My brother. The one person I thought would always have my back. The person I trusted more than anyone in the world. And that was when I realized I couldn't stay. I couldn't look at her the same way. "I'm done," I said, cutting her off. "I can't do this anymore. I can't be with someone who's lied to me like this. Who's betrayed me in the worst possible way." I waited for her to say something. Anything. But all I heard was silence on the other end of the line. She didn't even try to stop me. She knew it was over. I hung up the phone and tossed it on the couch. It felt final. It felt like a door slamming shut for good. But as much as I wanted to feel a sense of relief, it didn't come. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd lost something huge, something irreplaceable. There was no easy way out of this. And there was no way to undo the pain. I spent the next few days avoiding everything. I didn't go to work. I didn't reach out to anyone. I didn't care about anything. I just needed to be alone. But Elena wasn't the only one who had caused this mess. I had to deal with Misha too. The betrayal ran deeper than just her. It was him too. He was my brother, my blood, and he'd stabbed me in the back like it was nothing. I kept thinking about how it all started. How I had let him into my life, let him into our home. How I had trusted him with everything. And how he had thrown it all away. There was a part of me that wanted to confront him. I wanted to yell at him, to scream at him for what he'd done. But that wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't change what had happened. So, I just waited. I waited for him to come to me. And he did. It was late one evening, a week after everything had fallen apart, when my phone buzzed. Misha, the screen read. I let it ring for a few seconds before picking it up. I didn't want to talk to him, but I needed to know what he had to say. Hello, I said, my voice as flat as I could make it. Nico, Misha's voice was heavy, like he hadn't slept in days. I need to see you. I don't think we have anything to talk about, I said, trying to keep my distance. I need to apologize, he said quickly. I've been a total asshole. I know I've ruined everything. I don't know why I did it. I don't know how it happened. But I swear to you, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You didn't mean for it to happen? I scoffed. You slept with my wife, Misha. My wife. I know, he said, his voice shaky. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to understand. But I'm asking for a chance to explain. To make it right. Make it right. I repeated bitterly. How do you make that right, Misha? How do you undo what you've done? There was a long pause. And then I heard him take a deep breath. I don't know. Please, Nico, let me talk to you. Just once. I didn't know if I was ready for that. But part of me wanted to hear him out. Part of me needed to know how deep this betrayal really went. Fine, I said finally. But don't think for a second that this fixes anything. It doesn't. There was another long pause on his end. I don't expect it to, he said quietly. But I owe you that much. And with that, I made a decision. I was done with Elena. But Misha, he was still my brother. And maybe, just maybe, he'd realize the price of his betrayal. I didn't know what I was expecting when I agreed to meet Misha. Maybe I thought he'd show up, head down, groveling for forgiveness. Maybe I thought he'd cry, or at least apologize with some real weight behind it. But I wasn't prepared for how much his presence still affected me. The moment I saw him, I felt the same old connection, the same old bond I'd spent my whole life cultivating. But it wasn't enough to undo the damage. It could never be enough. I didn't want to meet at the house. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. So we met at a small cafe on the edge of town. One of those places that serves stale coffee and greasy pastries, but no one cares because it's quiet. The kind of place where you can just sit, pretend the world hasn't fallen apart. When he walked in, I didn't recognize him at first. He had that look, the kind of hollowed-out exhaustion that you don't get from just a bad week. This was the kind of look you get when everything you thought you knew has turned to dust. His eyes were sunken, his face pale, like he hadn't slept in days. It wasn't a surprise. Misha had always been a talker, always the one who could charm his way out of trouble, always the one who knew what to say to make people believe in him. But now, there was nothing charming about him. He looked like a man who'd been broken, and maybe he had. "Hey," he said quietly as he slid into the seat across from me. He didn't look me in the eye at first, just stared at the table, like he was afraid of what he'd see if he did. "Hey," I replied, my voice neutral. There was a long silence. He was waiting for me to speak, I could tell. But what was there to say? What was I supposed to say to the man who had destroyed my life? He was my brother, my blood, and I didn't know how to reconcile that with what he'd done. Look, Nico, he started, his voice low like he was trying to control it. I don't know how it happened. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. I don't have any excuse for what I did. I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry. But I need you to understand. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to go this far. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, letting him talk. Because what could I say? What was the point? He wasn't the same guy who'd come to me with beer in his hand, telling me about his latest dumb decision, and expecting me to laugh it off. That guy was gone. The guy sitting across from me now was a stranger. I never should've, he trailed off, staring at the table, clearly struggling to put words to something that didn't even have an explanation. I don't even know why I did it. She came to me, Nico. She was broken. And God, I should have stopped it. I should have told her it was wrong. But I didn't. I let it happen. And now I don't know what the hell to do with myself. His words weren't comforting. They weren't a balm to the anger that was still burning inside of me. Instead, they only made it worse. I didn't want his guilt. I didn't want his confession. What I wanted was my brother back. The one who had never even thought to betray me, let alone follow through on something like this. You think I don't know? I finally said, my voice shaking with the frustration I hadn't let out yet. You think I don't know she came to you, Misha? That she came running to you because I wasn't enough for her? Because I wasn't paying attention, or whatever her damn excuse is. I know everything. I know about the note, the meeting times. You didn't think I'd find out? You didn't think it would come back on you? He winced, like I'd slapped him. But I didn't care. He needed to hear it. He needed to understand just how deep the wound went. I didn't think, he whispered, almost like he was ashamed to say it out loud. I didn't think about you. I didn't think about what it would do to you. Yeah, you didn't, I said bitterly. You just thought about your own damn needs. About getting your own rocks off. She was there. You didn't care that she was my wife. You didn't care that she was supposed to be off limits. You didn't care about anything but yourself. He looked up at me then, and for the first time, I saw something that wasn't just guilt. There was shame there, real shame. He looked like he was about to say something, but then he stopped himself. Maybe he realized it wouldn't change anything. It didn't matter what he said anymore. The truth was, nothing he said could undo it. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said after a long pause. I know I don't deserve it. I don't expect you to look at me the same way again. I don't deserve that. I nodded, feeling a bitter taste rise in my throat. You're right. You don't deserve it. And I don't think I'll ever look at you the same way again. You've ruined everything. You've ruined us. His face crumpled like he was about to cry, but he didn't. He just sat there, defeated. I don't know if there's a way back for us, Nico, he said quietly, almost to himself. I don't know if we can fix this. But I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. And for a moment, I thought about it. About what it would take to make it right. About the bond we once had, the years we'd spent together as kids, as brothers, growing up in the same house, sharing the same dreams. But then I thought about Elena. And I thought about how the world had shifted. How everything had broken beyond repair. There was no going back. Not this time. I'm done, I said. You're my brother, but this is too much. I don't think I can be the same with you again. And I don't think I want to be. Misha sat there for a while, not saying a word. Just staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. I wasn't sure what he expected from me. I wasn't sure what I expected from him. But I knew one thing for sure. This was it. There was no more pretending. No more giving second chances. The damage had been done, and there was no way to take it back. I left the cafe without looking back. I didn't need to say anything more to Misha. He had nothing left to offer me, and I had nothing left to offer him. The last of the ties that bound us had snapped, and I was done trying to mend them. It was over. I went straight back to the small apartment I'd rented, not because I wanted to be alone, but because I didn't want to face anyone. Not yet. I needed time to think, to make sense of what had happened. I poured myself a drink, not for the comfort, but to fill the silence that was ringing in my ears. I thought about everything that had led up to this, about Elena's lies, Misha's betrayal, the twisted web of deceit I'd been caught in. I thought about the years I'd spent with Elena, the love we had, or at least the love I thought we had. Now it all felt like it had been a lie. But I wasn't angry anymore. At least, not the way I had been in the beginning. The rage had turned into something colder, something deeper. It was like the wound had been cut so deeply that there was nothing left to bleed. Only a hollow, empty space where all the love and trust used to be. My phone buzzed again, breaking through my thoughts. Elena, the screen read. I stared at the name for a long moment before I picked it up. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to hear her voice. But I did it anyway. Hello, I said, keeping my voice flat, detached. Nico, she said, her voice trembling. She was still crying, and it stung to hear it. But I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. I didn't feel anything anymore. I'm so sorry. Please, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I don't know how I let this go so far. But I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me. I didn't answer right away. I just listened, letting her words wash over me. She was pleading, begging for forgiveness, for a second chance. The same old story. You're sorry, I finally said, my voice tight. You're sorry, but you slept with my brother. You betrayed me with him. Elena, how does that even make sense? How do you expect me to believe anything you say after that? I never meant for it to happen, she said quickly, as if that was some kind of excuse. I didn't plan it. It was just, one thing led to another, and I couldn't stop it. But it was a mistake. A huge mistake. And I promise, Nico, I'll never make it again. Stop, I said, my voice cold. Stop trying to fix it. There's no fixing this. I could hear her choking on her tears, her breathing uneven. Nico, please. Please don't leave me. Don't leave us. I sat back, staring at the wall. It felt like 1,000 pounds were pressing down on my chest. Part of me wanted to believe her. Part of me wanted to say that we could work through it, that we could somehow pick up the pieces and rebuild what we'd lost. But deep down, I knew it was impossible. You don't get it, Elena, I said softly. You've already left. You left me the moment you made that choice. I can't be with someone who doesn't respect me, who doesn't value what we had. And I sure as hell can't be with someone who can betray me like that. I've already lost everything. You've already taken it all from me. I never meant to. I cut her off. It doesn't matter what you meant. The damage is done. And I can't keep pretending it hasn't happened. I'm done. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought maybe she was going to hang up. But then she spoke again, this time in a whisper. Nico, please. I love you. I always have. I'm so sorry. Please don't leave me. Her words hit me like a slap, but it didn't hurt the way it used to. It just felt empty. She had no right to say that anymore. Not after everything. I don't know who you are anymore, I said quietly. I don't know who I am, either. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. I ended the call before she could say anything more. The line went dead, and for the first time in days, I felt something that wasn't anger or pain. I felt free. The next few weeks were a blur. I didn't look back. I didn't reach out to Misha. I didn't try to salvage anything with Elena. I just kept moving forward, letting the pieces fall where they may. I kept busy, focused on work, on rebuilding a life that had been shattered. There were times when the loneliness crept in, when I thought about the life I'd lost, and wondered if I'd ever truly be happy again. But then I remembered something. I didn't need her. I didn't need anyone who didn't respect me. I realized I had to rebuild myself first. I had to heal before I could even think about letting someone back into my life. And maybe, just maybe, there would be something better waiting for me when I was ready. Elena tried to contact me a few more times, but I ignored her calls. Misha sent a message once, apologizing again, asking if we could talk. But I didn't respond. I didn't want to talk. I didn't need to. Eventually, they both faded out of my life. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't a clean ending. It wasn't neat or poetic or dramatic. It was messy. It was painful. But it was mine. And in the end, that was enough. I was done being someone else's second choice. Done being the guy who allowed betrayal to define him. I didn't need revenge to make me feel better. The quiet, final act of walking away, of leaving them both to deal with the wreckage they'd created, that was enough. I was ready to start over. And this time, I was going to do it for me.